Hey there, Live Like Your Nail Color gals. Are you willing to shake up the way you think, work, and lead? The relentless pace of business today is taking a serious toll on all of us. We might strive to be purpose-driven, impactful, and innovative, but we're often hijacked by never-ending to-do lists and constant crisis management. So what's the solution? Unfortunately, it's not as simple as throwing out the old rules and learning new ones. It's about developing the insights to know when to follow conventional leadership wisdom and when to defy it. Today's gal pal, Sarah Canaday, is here to share some of those insights. But first, before we get into our conversation, have you taken my quiz to determine your nail color persona? All you have to do is go to livelikeyournailcolor.com/quiz. You answer a few quick questions, and in your results, discover your specific nail color persona, your built-in strengths, and how to tap into those strengths when chip happens. Again, just go to livelikeyournailcolor.com/quiz. Now let's get talking with Sarah.
Tired of so much chip happening? Discouraged by so much downer news? Weary from chronic crisis? Don't let the chips keep you down. Welcome to the Live Like Your Nail Color podcast, where the tips of your fingers and toes are ready to inspire you to not give up and to keep creating the business, career, and life you want. In each episode, we flip the chip and let our fun nail color with that crazy fun name cheer us on to remember our strengths, embrace the power of choice, see life as an adventure, and know resilience is only a touch-up or change-up away. Get ready for a good time and a good laugh with your host, Mary Foley.
Welcome back, Live Like Your Nail Color gals. You know, on this podcast, we look for ways to flip the chip, meaning when a situation is challenging, tough, or a big how can we approach it differently and maybe turn it upside down, flip it in order to move forward? Well, today's guest is a great example. Sarah Canaday is an author, keynote speaker, and executive coach. One of her books, it's called Leadership Unchained, Defy Conventional Wisdom for Breakthrough Performance, really got my attention. She says that traditional wisdom that molded leadership for years is losing its effectiveness in our chaotic, digitally overwhelmed world. And in some cases, those principles may even be impeding your progress. I was like, whoa. Good news is that Sarah offers a unique perspective that helps modern leaders break free from the chains of conventional wisdom and blaze new trails for even greater success, which is why I really wanted to talk with her and find out what that unique perspective is and what we can learn from it. Sarah, welcome to the Live Like Your Nail Color podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you are too, because I read up also, I could have said all these other, trainings that you have and all these places that you worked and education, and like she knows a lot. Okay. But what I really want to do today is go, let me get to that brain. Okay. What's from those experiences? And there's a lot of women listening who have a depth of experience as well, right? That we often just don't always tap into to pull out.
Right. And, far be it from me to say that I have all the answers. In fact, part of why I wrote this book and teach what I teach is that old saying, right? We teach what we most need to learn. So I am a work in progress like everyone else.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because we're all working in progress here on this podcast. Now, one thing that's unique about, the Live Like Your Nail Color podcast, you don't get everywhere, is I always like to start out by asking my guest, what is their nail color persona? Because, I have a quiz to determine what's your nail color persona. So I know you took it. And what I want to know right off is what turned out to be your persona, and did it nail you?
I think it did nail me. I came under the archetype of a solid sister.
Excellent.
Yes. So I think it did nail me.
And do you remember the aspects of the solid sister that might have just really resonated with you, stood out?
Yeah. I mean, I think it describes somebody who is gracious. I like to think that I work to do that. I really am conscientious about trying to be gracious, that I'm comfortable in my own skin, that I am, or at least the archetype, that warm, friendly,
Mhm.
And I sure as heck hope that people describe me that way.
All right, solid. So that sounds good. Now, it also asks in the quiz, what's your fave? You're like your go-to nail color, right? So, what did that turn out to be? And I'm wondering if that also nails you.
It nailed me to a T because the general category was cream,
Okay.
but the actual color that I go to is an OPI color called bubble bath.
Oh, I know of that one. Yeah.
Yes. And, I just got tickled when I thought of that because I am known in my family to be I love baths. Like I get so excited at night when it's bath time. Right. And so I thought, wow, how apropos that my favorite color is bubble bath.
And I can see it now. At least the bubbles are like cream-like, all the bubbles, right, coming up.
Yes.
Now, I want to read the description of the color cream and see if that adds any additional thing to your connection here. It says that a cream nail color reveals that you are calm and elegant, that maybe that graciousness is there. You are relaxed and don't need to draw attention to yourself. Well, if you're relaxed in a tub, let's probably say it's probably solo. And others feel your warmth and are comfortable being around you.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. I hope that's what people say. But I really feel like we are products of how others see us more than anything. But I sure hope I align with those things. I'd like to think so.
Well, what's so interesting is when you say, I hope that's how, whether it's people pick up on me, or I hope that's what I project. I think even just that intention that you want to show up that way, that you want that to be the experience, it dramatically increases the probability that you're doing it, right?
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Well, let's dive into your book, Leadership Unchained. Why does leadership need to be unchained? I mean, and it's kind of like, so it's like saying, why is leadership as we've known it, why is it cutting it in today's world?
Yeah. Well, the title is, as you can imagine, trying to come up with something a little bit sexy, a little bit on the edge, a little fringe. But essentially what I'm trying to say is that so many leaders feel bogged down by the traditional success principles, the principles that and I say we because I was a leader in corporate for, 8 years, that we felt, obligated to follow these success principles. And so not only did those hold us down and do I visualize chains, so to speak, but they really held us back from, I think, achieving more and connecting with the more meaningful parts of our world as a leader.
So that's a pretty heavy thing. I mean, literally talks about the weights of these chains, right? Bogging them down. And so is there, these successes, could you give us an example, right, of just one success principle? You're like, it worked before. I understood why it was out there, but it's not as effective today.
Right. The one that comes to mind the most for me is a bias for action, because leaders by nature are doers, right?
Yeah.
And for years, we heard the moniker, take action, a bias for action. It comes from the military, right? And of course, would you want to go into war with somebody who had a bias for action? Absolutely. And, it was just ingrained in me, not only in my upbringing, but in my early years as a leader. I was rewarded for being a doer and a driver, right?
Yeah.
But then it got to the point where I realized in my own business and after coaching a number of leaders that bias for action was getting in the way. And the best story I have about that is a couple of years ago, right before COVID, I had the opportunity to help facilitate an offsite executive retreat. It was a 4-day retreat, but on one particular day, the executives were taken to this beautiful trail setting for an outdoor business simulation. think of like an outdoor scavenger hunt with beautiful but challenging trail settings, right?
All right.
And these teams were broken up into pods of 4, and they were each given a map, a set of trail hints, and a compass, right? So as a facilitator, I had my own pod of 4 assigned to me, and they were given about 90 minutes to strategize and then present me with their plan. Okay, I'm not going to go into detail here, but I'll tell you that one of their primary strategies was to stick to the compass holder as their primary guide, right? They had quite a few strategies, but that was a biggie. And so we go to the starting gate, the whistle blows, and you can just imagine what happened. Rather than sticking to their strategy, there was a woman that was running to, a tree because she thought she heard a trail hint that rhymed with oak, and another man that went running to the stream because, ladies, men don't need directions, right?
Right.
So they just abandoned, under the heat of the moment, they abandoned their key strategy. And if we think about it, we tend to do the same thing all the time. We're in a meeting, something sparks our creativity or sparks an idea. We write it down, we leave the meeting, we go back to fighting fires. That idea never sees the light of day. Or if you're like me, you're running from meeting to meeting, you get in the car, you take a look at an email. This literally happened to me several weeks ago. I looked at an email, even though I was 2 minutes from my house. And I read just the first sentence. And of course, I reacted and sent this person a message saying, oh my gosh, I thought I had done a better job on this presentation. I sent her my draft basically to give me feedback. And she was saying she didn't have time. And if I had bothered to be patient and get home and see the full email, it just meant, listen, I'm going to come back to this, but I don't have time right now. So when we think through this seemingly great strategy and how it actually can get in the way, I think it gives us pause. And the other reason I say that is we are being divulged with data, with meetings, we're being briefed or we're briefing others all day. There is no way we can make sense of something or find a red thread, or in this day, find unusual connections that we need to make if we don't sit and let those things marinate. Right? Our problems are too complex. To be competitive and to differentiate, we need to look for those unusual connections or those red threads. And we can't begin to do it if we are constantly in a bias for action. So that's one example.
Wow. It's in some ways counterintuitive is the word that came to my mind.
It absolutely is. In fact, I describe all of the practices that are in my book as counterintuitive.
Oh, wow. So this thing of what really grabbed me, and I think it's like the contrarian point of view. These have been the success principles, and they aren't now. What? That gets your attention.
Sure.
You said bias for action. At first, I thought, I have a bias for action, as a woman, running her own business, right?
Yes.
I'm leading my business. I'm leading myself. And as also someone who's coached women entrepreneurs, a bias for action is good. I'd rather you start something. I'd rather you try something, get going on something. And then from there, you can modify. But to your point, if you're bombarded with all of this information and these meetings and then new things coming in, and then you're like, and I've got to make sense of it quickly and do something. Well, it's the bombardment or all these inputs at a higher rate. That's what I'm hearing. So much the complexity kicks in. And our bias are almost like our knee-jerk reaction. I got to do something. Like, yeah, that do something now needs to be sit with it.
Yes.
Not sit and not ever do anything, but I'm hearing
absolutely
sit with it and process it.
Absolutely. And so, the modern leader knows when to defy the conventional wisdom and knows when to use it, right? So I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Don't have a bias fraction. That's not what I'm
Well,
suggesting.
because bubble bath, you are
Exactly.
like the bubble bath. All right.
Exactly. Right. But, what I tell people, because where they think I'm going is this whole, mindfulness and, sitting still. And that is not what I'm suggesting. It's not that I'm against that, but I like to call it a mental time in.
Oh, versus
So you are
Mhm.
you are really doing a lot when you are sitting with this information, right? You're either organizing your thoughts. In some cases, you are getting rid of the data that is just cluttering your thoughts, right? What can I get rid of that really isn't germane to this decision so that I can have a clear path forward? Or maybe you're sitting there with that time and you are picking up the phone and you're finally talking to a colleague and asking them to help you role play a difficult conversation, as opposed to just having it, getting it off your to-do list, right? Because those come back to bite you. Maybe you are looking at your due later folder and there is a app that you've been thinking could really save you or your team time, but you don't want to sign up for the free 30 days because before you know it, you're going to get an alert saying, great, do you want to buy this? Well, you never got a chance to play around with it and see if it's useful. So there's a lot of things you can do when you're taking what I call a strategic pause.
Yeah. I'm thinking that as you're saying this obviously applies to leaders in organizations, leaders who are in businesses. It's a great strategy for our life.
Yes.
Pause, because we're getting just as bombarded with all these things that have to do with our personal lives. It could be kids or spouses involved. There can be other relatives and community things that you'd want to get involved in, or just like your own time off and your time out, right? Wow, so the strategic pause. So that makes me think more about, you brought up this term, the modern leader. And I guess the modern leader is one who goes, hey, look at the bias for action differently. Press the strategic pause. Might be one of the strategies of the modern leader. Tell us more about this, because there's a part of me that goes, I bet that's the key in the way you framed it to help us all go, success principles of the past. How do I bring them forward? How do I use them effectively now, or flip them? Like I said, flip the chip.
Right. So I actually have a modern leader index that can help you see where you are on the spectrum. Am I carrying all of these once wise, but perhaps maybe dated success principles with me? Or am I willing to try on new practices? And it's 15 questions. It'll take you 5 minutes and it'll sort of tell you, where are you on this spectrum? And then the best part about it is it gives you some suggestions of how to move the needle more in the direction of a modern leader versus a leader who is tied down or chained down to, conventional practices.
Okay. So, all right, I took it. I didn't tell you I took it, but I went ahead and took it because I wanted to see, because who doesn't love a good quiz? So to speak?
Right.
I mean, it's, so I took it and I tried to be as honest as possible.
Sure.
Okay? Versus this is my best day.
Right.
I do these things, right? So here's how I came out.
Okay.
Everybody knows. All right. So my results came immediately, which I loved, by the way. So there were kind of 3 overall points on a continuum: conventional, evolving, and modern. Okay. Which obviously it's a modern leader index. So the more I could be towards the modern, the more I feel really good about myself. Right. So I didn't make it all the way to modern. All right. Full disclosure. I am evolving. I'm an evolving leader. And then though, what I read was, I had some things about things that you're good at. But then it was, okay, here's some things to help you in your journey towards breakthrough success of modern leadership. So a couple of them really surprised me. So can I share those with you?
I would love to hear it.
Okay. So there, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 different things that really suggested that I consider. Funny you should say the first thing that you were just talked about, because it says set aside uninterrupted time every day or week to pause and think. And then it goes, give your mind time to process everything you've recently seen, heard, or read, and search for unexpected connections and consider new ideas. And, that we've just talked about that strategic pause. And I am finding myself, honestly, I thought this hit home so well for me right now, Sarah, wanting more of that uninterrupted time to process.
Yeah.
And I can easily take action and I can easily say, hey, let's come up with a plan. But I've gotten exhausted from doing that the last several years in particular.
Yes.
And so this really spoke to me and I thought, okay, so let me just ask you with that one. When you say set aside uninterrupted time every day or week, I'm thinking, I knowing myself, if I don't schedule it, it really probably isn't going to happen unless I'm forced to. So do you have a recommended frequency or strategy, a tactical thing, I should say, really to get that work in that uninterrupted time? I'm thinking of the woman who's like going from early in the morning to,
Sure.
A good 10 hours a day.
Sure.
How can she either work that in or substitute or make this a reality in her?
Right. Yes. It's about making an unbreakable appointment with yourself. And from literal here, technically, most people use the Microsoft Office product, Outlook, right? What a lot of people don't know is that there's this new feature that just showed up and we just ignore it, but it's a button called Insights. And if you click that button, there is an option for focus time. And you can literally block your calendar. So that's a very literal strategy that I use and that I recommend with leaders and program managers and product managers. And I say for a lot of people, Friday mornings are a really good time to do this.
I was even thinking of Friday because it's almost like the buildup of the week, the work week. And then, because Monday morning would be more like, what's my plan if I have it ready? But Friday, it's what happened.
Yes. Friday is when you can reflect back on what you've consumed. And the other thing I tend to suggest to people is that you do this outside of your typical office space, whether that's a home office space or you're going into the office that day because maybe you're a 3-day a week, but change up your scenery. Because when we do that, it really helps us kind of get out of our left brain and into our right brain a little more. And it's too tempting if we're in our typical place of work to be sucked back in to typical flow, right?
Yeah, I love that too, because I find myself when I change my geography, my mind seems to come along. Like, in other words, we're someplace new, and it frees up. It kind of disconnects from in my regular office. So I'm imagining, like, there's so many large companies. They have all these like gathering spaces now.
Yes.
Like I could go to another floor where I don't normally go. I could go to a whole other part of the department and sit down, or on the way to work. My first thing is to stop at a local coffee shop and decide I'm going to spend a half hour or an hour doing that. And that's, that's my designated time.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
This is where listeners, and if I'm in front of an audience, I see a little bit of a glazed, in some cases, rolling of the eyes.
Yeah. Right.
Because people are saying to themselves, she has no idea. Right.
Yeah.
I'm already seeing the pushback, like, oh, that sounds brilliant, but I don't have the time for this. Right. And I get it. And funny enough, how you make the time is with another counterintuitive strategy. And that is to start making a stop doing list instead of a to-do list.
I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
And you would be amazed. It is very difficult to do it. If I give somebody an exercise in a group, if I'm speaking and I give them some time to make a stop doing list, it is grueling for these leaders and managers and entrepreneurs to get 2 things on the list. Now, if I give them, if I say, okay, just play with me here, give me your to-do list for tomorrow, I mean, the writing doesn't stop. So on the face of it, it seems like it might be easy, but it's very difficult. But I really challenge people, look at reports you're doing and ask yourself, is this still a value? Is it still being read? Could it be done monthly or quarterly instead of weekly? Look at meetings you're attending. They're well run. You like the people that attend, but if you really asked yourself, what % of that meeting is really germane to moving myself or my team forward? Should you go? Should you just accept it every week, right?
Yeah.
And then look at the bigger stuff. Look at products, look at services, look at, initiatives. And again, this is where I get pushback. Sarah, I don't have agency over that. I can't make the call to stop doing big things. Well, maybe not. But as a leader, I would say you at least have the obligation to shed light on some things that are no longer serving you or your clients, right?
Yeah.
Again, work in progress for me. I had my own experience with this last year when I was doing my planning, and I had a very wise facilitator stop me in my tracks because I was saying, I want to grow the piece of my pie in this way, this way, and this way. And I was ready to say, okay, how can we do that? And he so wisely stopped me and said, no, we're not ready for that. We're not ready to start thinking about your strategies to move forward. I think you need to ask yourself, what services do you need to stop doing so you can have more time for the things you want more of?
Yeah. Oh, that just so resonates with me. In fact, the very second thing that's on my list that you recommend as an evolving leader that hasn't quite reached the modern leader is you say, get picky. I love that word. Get picky about what occupies your time and attention, which is what we're just talking about, and I was thinking about, as you were saying this, you were talking about your strategic planning session that you were doing at the end of this, the last year. I did for myself. I put it out on a blog and recommended to those on my email list to do a stop, start, continue exercise. And I'm sure you've heard of that. It's not a new thing, but it might be new to some people and that they haven't done it in a while. But like, what am I going to stop doing? What I'm going to start doing? What am I going to continue to do? And what I find is I find if the first thing that comes to my mind is what I'm going to continue to do. It's like the ongoing to-do list, right? And I think about, wouldn't it be fun? It's great. Or I've been wanting to start this or do this new project or initiative is happening. And then I go, well, if you're going to do this, start this, what are you going to give up? What are you going to either reduce down, or what are you going to just say, this no longer works, or I'm not spending any more time with it, or my team's not, or I'm going to delegate it? Because, I think as women, here's what I go. Maybe it's being a woman. Maybe it's being an overachiever. Maybe it's yes, yes, and yes. I don't think about taking things off my plate. I think about just adding it.
Right.
And I'm like, that's just stupid. But yet, why do we get to that point? I think in part because I think about my own life. Well, ever since I've been a young adult, I've just been adding things on. I got my first job, then I added in my overall life. Then, then I got married. I added that. I didn't have children, but a lot of women do that. They add children. You keep adding, right?
Sure.
And so, and yet we don't think about subtracting. We want to make things bigger and better, or at least that's what the idea is. And so it can be a default perspective that we're not even realizing.
Absolutely, it is. And again, work in progress. I have reflected many times in my career about how I know that I have this mantra, and it's not a good one. We usually think of mantras as a good thing, that my value is very much tied to my productivity and ability to produce. That is not a good mantra.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of us do that.
Mm-hmm.
somewhere along the line, we got the message that that's our value. And our ability to do it all, by the way.
Yeah. And here's what I listen for myself. And I will say, I hear this in my husband all the time. I say, "Oh, how'd your day go?" "I got a lot done." Right?
Yeah.
Or "I didn't get as much done as I wanted." And so you're like, that's the measure?
That's the measure.
That's the measure. And if we say that to ourselves, I'm guilty of it. Yeah. So go on with that. You're right. I get that. That's not a good mantra. How do we flip that mantra? Or where do we shift to?
Yeah. Well, at the beginning, I think you were describing from my content this idea of reconnecting leaders to the meaning of their work. And that may have sounded sort of trite or like, marketing speak, but that really is the emphasis of why I'm suggesting these practices, because I talk to leaders who feel like nothing more than to-do lists, walking around, or firefighters. And they're beginning to question their role as a leader because they're not doing the meaningful parts of their role anymore, right? They're not doing the coaching. They're not watching other people grow and learn. They're not feeling a part of the company's evolution, right? They want to be out there igniting fires, not just putting them out. And so, these are the ideas or counterintuitive practices are a way to sort of recalibrate how we measure our success. And then how do we reconnect to the meaningful part? Right?
Yeah, because that's what gives, really, that's where the mojo comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Wow. I want to just say one last suggestion that you had for me to go from evolving to modern and get your take on this. 'Cause I would say that this one has really had to go, wow. That is resist the temptation to overly rely on your own expertise. And so you explain that. You say, remove the expectation and unnecessary pressure of feeling like you always have to have the right answer. Value the exploration that comes with asking the right questions, and then actively listen. And I thought, oh yeah, because if you're really seen to be successful, you know your stuff. You're the go-to person. They ask you, you got stuff done. You made stuff happen, right? And then as I've been growing a business, I go, oh, I know how to do that. I can get that done, right? And so that might not be my expertise, but I don't think first and foremost about who can I hire or who can I delegate this to, right? To get it done, right? And so therefore, I don't have to be the expert at everything. But it's like what got me there isn't what's going to get me to the next level or have me to be the best leader or my best contribution. And that's really made me think. That's just what went through my mind. Please add to that what I need to have some highlight on.
Yeah, I would love to. And again, this goes back to just working with leaders, even before the pandemic. Leaders were already overwhelmed and taking a toll on everything that was consuming them, and the pace and the always on and the do more and get it done faster. And the more meaningful part of their role, they couldn't quite see that it wasn't about having the answers, but asking the right questions in a way that was challenging their employees, for example. So I mean that in several ways. So one is, yes, it's how are you challenging others so that they grow, as opposed to just quickly and impatiently giving them the answers. Oh, this is how you do it, as opposed to, well, what do you think? Mm-hmm. Or instead of saying, here's what we need to do to reach our goal, what if you said, here's the outcome we're aiming for? How do you think we should get there, team? Right? Because those things on the face of it don't feel efficient. And we're always in efficiency mode. They feel like they're going to take longer, more energy, but they are the more meaningful and the more engaging parts of our role, right? The other meaning of the asking the right questions is to let let ourselves off the hook a little bit, right? And if we are always feeling pressure to be the domain expert, then we're trying to read everything that comes through our inbox. We are trying to keep up with all the data that's coming at us. And so we're not leaving any room for, difference makers, or perhaps we're not seeking out others' perspectives, especially those that don't typically agree with us. And so our solutions, in my opinion, aren't going to be as robust, because if we have the answers, we're not seeking out some divergent thinking, right? So there's a lot of implications for this idea of move into the territory of asking the right questions. I read somewhere the other day that executives, for example, need to ask themselves, am I exploiting what I already know? Or am I moving into the uncomfortable to learn at the next level? Right?
Yeah. And am I willing to get uncomfortable?
Right.
The time as well as.
And all of these things aren't easy, because guess what? The more stressful things are, which COVID shook everything up, as a behavioral scientist will tell you, the more inclined we are to hold and cling tight to what we've always done, because that gives us comfort and some sense of control. So talk about counterintuitive.
Yeah.
The strategies themselves are counterintuitive, and the practice of stepping out is counterintuitive.
That's really good. So when we might feel fearful of taking more time with something, or fearful of doing it differently to get to that, we hear that phrase, get to the next level. I don't know if it's necessarily a level,
right?
But it is, this thing of efficient versus effective. Efficient, I get a lot of stuff done. Effective, well, did you get the right things done, or did it get done well? And so part of this is that I want to be effective as a leader. I want to be effective leading my life. This, world that we're living in, and how things have already shifted, and, they're not shifting back. So how do I navigate myself in this this brave new world is really, to me, why I'd want to do it. Why do we even want to get uncomfortable? Why do really, and it's going to be messy. I mean, it just is, but everyone's a little messy. So that's one of the advantages is that there's a lot of imperfectness happening all around us. And, so I'm wondering, it makes me think of, okay, what's the risk of not moving towards becoming a modern leader, as you call it? What is it that if I just say, I'm holding on to these leadership principles, I don't care what you think, they're still the way they are, it's working for me well enough anyway. What would you say to not only that person, but to all of us about why we'd want to take ourselves on this journey?
Well, I think for starters, people are telling me they are no longer getting the kind of traction that they used to, being tethered to their devices and working longer hours. I mean, that used to be, how some people got ahead, right? That's a conventional wisdom practice of putting in the hours, but that's not even helping, right? So, if you want to stay on the treadmill, that's one issue. The other thing is, you talked about this idea of efficient versus effective. I got to tell you, the leaders I'm talking to, they've gone one step further. They don't just want to be effective at their jobs. They want to reconnect to the meaningful stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So if you want to stay in a job where you're efficient and yes, you're effective, and effective can mean different things. Effective can be meaning the more meaningful stuff, right? But if you want to move to this idea where you are really part of the evolution of the company and of your team, then you got to move towards the modern leader approach. You've got to try on the new practices. Otherwise, you will stay, as you say, in the effective and maybe efficient mode. And you won't reconnect with that meaningful stuff. You won't make room for new ideas. You won't make room for new relationships and spark innovation, those types of things.
I know that by me sharing my index, right, and where I fell, that we got to talk about some of those strategies, overall. I'm curious, in all your experience as a speaker and as an author, consultant, working with people one-on-one and groups, what strategy is the most challenging that you see again and again for leaders to adopt and to get good at?
Well, I can tell you the bias for action it's so deeply ingrained in all of us. That one, I will tell you, people resonate with that. That's a big challenge for them. But the other one that has been bubbling up a lot is this idea that I have in my book, the practice of communicating to engage and inspire versus just inform and impress. And on the face of it, it sounds like a book title or a chapter title, but what does it really mean? Well, we've all been conditioned to be very efficient in our communication,
right?
Bullet points, to be very articulate when we present, to know our facts inside and out, to be on the ready if we're asked a question or we get pushback from an executive. But what the generations, and I say that because this is generation, X, Y, and Z, maybe more Y and Z, but they don't buy that anymore. They're not impressed with a buttoned up communication piece. They want to co-create your communication piece. They want to be a part of it. They want you to come up with something very different. If you're going through monthly stats, they don't want to see the same spreadsheet and the same pie charts and bar charts every month. They're so desensitized by that. They want you to bring in bowls full of M&Ms with different levels, showing the differences in where you are. Or they want you to come up with some analogy of an initiative and how it's like a, old wine bottle, and they want to be part of it. They want to be asked at the beginning of the meeting, what do you already know about XY initiative? And how do we play a role in that? So those are things that we almost need to retrain ourselves, those of us that were in corporate 15, 20 years ago, that it's not about the polished and the buttoned up. It's the communication expectations are different.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Part of that is just like, make it interesting. My gosh, make it memorable. That is a skill to be learned.
It absolutely is.
And about engaging creativity. And, you hear again and again, because we're people, that it's still in these dissatisfaction or satisfaction, however you want to call it, surveys or assessments, what bubbles up as a problem again and again? Communication. It's such a broad topic, but what you've just said helps really pinpoint, narrow it down. Every leader and everybody who wants to influence others can take away going, it's not just about what is said and what needs to be communicated. I'm hearing it's how. And you're not only making it engaging and interesting, but you're connecting it probably to a bigger idea and a bigger purpose that people go, oh, well, now I understand why. Oh, I remember that. Like, and I'd want to, and I'm like, let's try and increase that, or let's do more of this. Or
yes.
I got an idea for that.
Yeah. And the other thing I bring up in that chapter is this idea that we do more as leaders to share our rationale, right? Again, in the days where I was in corporate, you kept things very close to the vest. It wasn't an open book, management by open book. But you gotta assume that people, A, do care, and B, that they will understand, right? Don't make the assumption that I'm not going to go into detail, they won't get it, or I don't think they care. wait a minute, that's not true. They do care and they will understand. And so do more to share the background and to share your rationale for making decisions.
Sounds great. That sounds like really, really good advice. If someone wants to take this quiz themselves, again, it's called the Modern Leader Index. Is that a great place to start to do it, and as a way to like really first self-assess and then say, hey, here's some areas to pinpoint for me to get better at? Would that be a good place to start if they want to?
I think it would be a great place to start. Yes.
Great. So what I'm going to do then is in the show notes, I'm going to put a link down to that specific place on your website. All right. But as we wrap up, I always ask my guests, all right, let's talk nail color again. If you could create a nail color name to inspire us to become a modern leader, what would that name be?
I came up with Good Enough Garnet.
Oh, okay. Do tell. Why? Tell us more about what that is. Garnet, you're red, right?
Because again, the challenge of today's leader is to let go of perfection, right? To let go of doing it all, and to know that it's good enough, right? Your to-do list doesn't have to include all your meetings. It's okay if they mention something that may have affected you or your team. It's not the end of the world. So the good enough has a lot of implications. And I just did garnet because it's an alliteration, right? It's a red and it's an alliteration. So Good Enough Garnet.
Well, it also made me think of Good Enough Darn It.
Darn it. There you go. I like that better.
I appreciate that. Hey, Sarah, for those who would like to get in touch with you, connect with you, in addition to your website and the index that we already talked about, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn is my primary platform. I mean, I have a Facebook page, but I really like to hear from people on LinkedIn.
It makes sense because you're doing a whole lot of things with business people, and that's the place to be. So That's fantastic. I will put that, your LinkedIn connection link in the show notes, your website, and also a link to your book, Unchained, Leadership Unchained. It did make me think of on chain.
Yes.
Right. All right. We don't want to be a fool.
Right.
I didn't really go into singing for a really good
reason.
Yeah, exactly. But it's fun to do. Hey, this has been fun talking with you.
Yes, it has.
These insights, it's really been great. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to keeping in touch.
Great. I appreciate you having me.
And now for the after party I call Flip the Chip, where I take a few moments to highlight something my gal pal shared that can help us all flip a challenge or a difficulty that's holding us back into something more positive that helps us move forward. What I want to highlight today is what Sarah said about flipping one of the most common leadership strategies, and that is having a bias for action. Sounds like a good thing to be action-oriented. She says it can be, but in an increasingly complex, fast-changing world, leaders need to take strategic pauses to process everything that's happening and to truly understand how they should proceed. Now, that's not just a leader, of course, in an organization. It's a leader in your business. It's a leader in your life. How do you truly, though, take a strategic pause in your busy schedule? Well, Sarah offered two practical suggestions. One was to book a time on your schedule to reflect, process, and think. Now, anything that's really important, we schedule, right? Friday mornings are often a great time to do this if you have a Monday through Friday work week. However, any time can work. Putting it on your schedule and protecting that time, that's the key. Number two was to change up your scenery. For example, you can go to a coffee shop or a gathering spot where you aren't distracted by your computer, your desk pile, or maybe a coworker. A different geography can stimulate your creative and analytical thinking. And here's an idea for your first strategic pause. Take Sarah's Modern Leader Index assessment and then review your results. Use her suggestions for improvements to reflect on yourself as a leader and to identify, like, say, one or two specific behaviors you can apply right away. I was really impressed with the suggestions that she gave, and I think they'll really make you think. And of course, you can always use your nail color to cheer you on by simply putting on a new color and giving it the name Good Enough Garnet, as Sarah suggested, or my version, Good Enough Darn It. So that every time you look at your fingers or toes, you're reminded that being a modern leader means letting go of perfection and the desire to do it all. It's far better to let your efforts be good enough so that you can take time to think about how to lead in the midst of so much change and complexity. You can make good choices to create the career, business, and life you want, one step, one nail color at a time. Look forward to being with you next time on the Live Like Your Nail Color podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Live Like Your Nail Color podcast. Ready to live and laugh more? Know a friend who could use some of that too? Then subscribe at liveLikeYourNailColor.com or your favorite podcast app and share this episode right now with the person who popped into your mind. Together, let's flip the chip to be stronger, smarter, and happier.